Hey everyone, thanks for attending this session here. I want to talk to you about the title of the presentation, OpenDaylight Has Oomph. What the presentation really is about is developer experience for OpenDaylight. Actually, I was going to do one thing here, put on a little timer, because that's always a challenge. All right. My name's Michael. I work for Red Hat since not very long. I actually started this job 2 months ago. So brand new to the community, meeting a lot of people here is very exciting to be here and be able to meet face-to-face people that I've seen on the mailing list and interacted with on video conferences. I tweet on Vorburger about many things not related to networking. And I wanted to shout out a book that the Red Hat CEO wrote that's called The Open Organization. I'm not actually getting paid to say this, but I did read this book and I think it's really good. So you might find it interesting as well. What questions should we be asking ourselves today? We should ask the same questions that we ask ourselves every day: the purpose of life, the meaning of life, and what, why, what, and how. So I want to talk to you about why has there been some work done on developer experience for OpenDaylight. So I introduce the topic, show you what we've actually done. Very short demo. I won't be able to run through the entire demo of the setup, but sort of kick it off and show you guys how you can try this out at home. A word about how it's done, so what's actually underneath this principle. And then the second part is sort of 2 parts. The second part's something about hot wheels and hot deployment and hot code. We'll see that. There will be a short demo that's part of that, and an idea about what's coming next on this front, and some Q&A at the end. Why? Why this topic? Why developer experience? It's easy, right? There's some source code you heard in the presentation from my colleague before. There's some Git repository. So you clone the Git repository and you use a Vim and VI and a hex editor and see lots of zeros and ones and start coding, right? It turns out that in practice, if you have a code base that has a large code base, it has dependencies, that has some tooling that goes with it, some code generation in the case of OpenDaylight. So you're doing some modeling, and this modeling generates some code, and you want some tooling for that. And for that tooling, in the industry, what we use is an IDE, an integrated development environment for when we write code. There's a bunch of them out there. There's one in particular that's, I guess it's fair to say, the de facto industry standard integrated development environment. It's a thing called Eclipse, which a large majority of people who code in Java nowadays use. So the OpenDaylight wiki has a page that says Eclipse setup. So about 2 months ago, when I started joining this project, I was like, OK, let me find the code and let me look at the code to see what people in this community do, how they code. Because we are a community that doesn't produce paper only, like a standards body, and that's not a drinking club, I think Neela said this morning, but we produce code. We produce a running platform. So where's the code? Let me try it out. And I found this page. So this page is fairly long, like I'm showing here on the right. It has like a copy. You scroll down here, and this is all the things you have to do to actually get the code visible. And then sort of 3/4 down the page, there's this section on the wiki. And it says, well, congratulations to you that you've followed 100 things to do. Not quite 100. But actually, it's not going to work. Because Eclipse is no longer able to compile OpenDaylight. Because yada, 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 a bunch of excuses. And it's like, well, that's interesting. So I took up this new job, and I'm not even going to be able to use an IDE. I've got to do something about this. So I looked a little bit closer at this. And I was like, what's in this code? What are the tools that are being required to contribute to OpenDaylight? And I'm not sure why this is flickering like this. Maybe my laptop. And I found that it's true that there is a number of tools that are required and things you need to do. So there's some setup you need to do. And so you need to first download this IDE, the Eclipse thing. And there's some extensions that you need for the code generation. And there's the code review Gerrit side that we saw in the presentation before. There's a bunch of things you need to do to make it convenient and comfortable to be able to develop. And I have some sympathy that this, for people who want to contribute and join this community, this may be a burden. This may be so that the bar of entry is not as low as it could have been, is what I at least thought personally when I saw this. Because as an open source project, OpenDaylight certainly wants to encourage all of you, anybody out there, to make it very easy to be able to contribute code. So you should be able to go somewhere and say, oh, this is how they do their things, and this is how I can make a contribution. And the easier that is, the more vibrant an open source community can be, because it makes it easier for people to contribute. So I was giving some thought to what we can do about this, and start at the beginning. It's always a good idea. How does somebody actually code? So nowadays, Java developers, you go to eclipse.org/download. If you choose to use that ID, you're not a hex editor because you like zeros and ones. And over there, it starts with a page which shows you that about 1.5 million people 2 months ago, 2.3 million people last week download a thing called the Eclipse installer. So this changed a little bit from about a year ago when there was a big zip file that sort of gave you everything pre-configured. Nowadays, there's an installer that this community came up with. This is another open source community. And they have this tool that you say, I want this and that, and then it starts downloading the required plugins. And it looks like this. So you download this, and you say, I am a developer who wants to just write Java, or I'm a developer who works with PHP, or I'm a developer who does modeling, textual modeling, domain-specific languages. This is actually my background. I've contributed some work in this space in a past life. And then it goes ahead and downloads the respective plugins and sets up projects to work on. So what's the shortest way to get OpenDaylight integrated into this? How cool would it be if, while you're on eclipse.org, you could actually get OpenDaylight set up? And that's just what I've done. If you click the advanced mode button over here, you come to this second page. Actually, this is so cool. I'm going to show you this live. This is more fun. So let me see if I can do this. So we go here. Let's see. So we go to eclipse.org. And we go to download. And we grab this installer. And this downloads a very small zip file. This is just, sorry about this flickering. I'm not sure what's causing this. 40 megs, just ready. Let me open my downloads folder. All right, so I unzip this thing that's been downloaded here. Boom, it's here. I start this installer. So this is live. I haven't actually downloaded this before or prepared this in any way. You can try this at home. And you get this Eclipse installer, what was on the slide before. And what you can do here is go to the advanced mode. So if you go over here, comes up with this UI. You say, yeah, I'm a Java developer. Like, OpenDaylight is with Java, not with PHP or something. So choose this and say next here. And then you get this project selection. So this tool, this installer tool, basically has a catalog of projects that can be provisioned into a workspace. So up to a month ago, this listed things like the Eclipse projects themselves. So if you want to contribute something to this IDE, you can check one of these boxes here. It lists a number of third-party projects. This is annoying. It lists a number of third-party projects. Like this one here is a home automation platform that Deutsche Telekom invests in, for example. These are some Java quality tools. And check it out down here. We actually have all of the OpenDaylight platform projects right there in the Eclipse installer. So if you wanted to contribute to OVSDB, because you found a bug in it, and you would, instead of sending a long mail to the mailing list complaining about it, just send a patch to propose a fix for it, you could click this here and say, get me this. Say next. Say, I want this in my OpenDaylight demo. Say next. And say finish. And what this will do is start actually downloading this. And this doesn't work because I'm offline here. We're not offline, but the internet connection here is not fast enough. This takes about 10 to 15 minutes. So I'm not going to let it run through. I'm going to go back to the slides, but I wanted to show you how easy it is actually to get started with setting up a development environment with this tooling. There's a screencast on YouTube that walks through in details for this that you can watch. What you get with this setup is the basic setup, like does a git clone and imports the projects. And it sets up some working sets that allows you, if you have several projects in the workspace, to keep them nicely separate. It does some magic. It's not really magic, but it sets up this entire Maven integration, which has been a pain point in the past for those of you who have looked at this ever. So it sort of puts the right, what's called Maven Eclipse extensions into this workspace and configures them, pre-configures them. There's a number of preferences that are set to make sure that it just works for OpenDaylight. So it sort of, click this button, you choose your projects, and it does the setup for you. And in addition to these preferences that are set suitable for OpenDaylight, it also pulls in a number of extra plugins. So these are Eclipse plugins, not OpenDaylight plugins. These Eclipse plugins are convenient for developers working on OpenDaylight. One that I think is adding value to people working on OpenDaylight with OpenDaylight's model-driven approach, where, as a number of speakers previously have mentioned, you have this Yang model-driven domain-specific language, text syntax for describing either toasters or network routers or switches or anything else. You actually get an IDE in Eclipse that you can work with these Yang models. So it looks like this. This is an example of such a Yang text file, and you get some coloring, and you get syntax completion, and stuff turns red if you type something invalid. The basic support that you're used to from coding in Java is available here for this Yang language that's so highly used in OpenDaylight. And this is a plugin that's one of the many, many projects under the OpenDaylight umbrella. What this tooling does is simply it makes it very, very easy to use this. You click a button and you get this. Fully integrated. I will not talk too much about this just because of time. The one thing I want to say to you here, for those of you in the room who are working on OpenDaylight and have your own projects, is this works today on a number of projects that I work on that Red Hat has an interest in. And it's possible that if you check some of the projects in that list in the installer, that you still have some red in the workspace. So the goal of the project is there shouldn't be any red in the workspace, right? You check the projects and they get provisioned. It's possible that if you try this at home for some of your projects, some work needs to be done still on the pom.xml files without getting into details here. If that happens, just drop a mail to the mailing list, and I'd be happy to have a look at this with you or just talk to me about it. But basically, the work that I did here in the last couple of weeks was, on the one hand, the Eclipse plugins. And on the other hand, there's a number of Gerrit changes that went into OpenDaylight codebase to fix things in the build scripts to make it easy to work in the IDE. So things happened in the past. People have suppressed things because they didn't work well. And there's some work that happened on this. So try it out, basically. And if you find it doesn't work well in the IDE, it's because of things in the project. Okay, I'm about halfway through, and I want to move on to two particular points now that we have a development environment and that we have an easy way to provision a workspace that we can see the OpenDaylight code of one of the many projects under the OpenDaylight umbrella that form the OpenDaylight platform. Well, I want to talk about two particular aspects of coding now that you have the possibility to code. One is the topic of code quality. And what this has to do with the IDE. So code quality is this idea that you can code in Java and you can write tests for this code. That's what Stephen was presenting before. And there are tools out there that can help to evaluate the quality of the code. So for those of you with a C background, there used to be this thing called lint, which sort of checks C code. There's equivalent things in the Java world. There's actually more than that. There's a number of them, and they go further than what lint used to do 20 years ago. They actually check anything from simple formatting rules down to security vulnerabilities, to calling methods the wrong way, to making common anti-patterns of using a certain library the wrong way. You want to log something and you pass the wrong argument into that logger. And there are tools out there that actually detect that. I personally think these tools are highly valuable because they help benefit from other people's experiences that have been codified into tools. Now, these tools exist. They can be set up. They can be configured. What does all of this have to do with the IDE and with the developer experience? Let me try to explain this with an example, just to make sure everybody is still high on coffee. A quick quiz in the room. I'd like to know who of you has an idea what these 4 example code review comments have in common. So these 4 statements here are from real-world code reviews on OpenDaylight's Gerrit. Somebody put in a change and said, I want to do it like this. And somebody said, no, we're not going to merge this. You can't do this because change the import statements to be alphabetically ordered. Or move comment to previous line because Sonar, which is one of these quality checks things that we run, will not like this. Or use this API instead of that API. Or this logger should be called log uppercase. What do these things have in common? Anybody who didn't look at the slides from the website? Suggestions? No? They're all from CheckStyle, yeah, they're from CheckStyle, yeah. The tool that raises them are CheckStyle. There's something particular in terms of code review. So what's the point of code review? We want to increase the quality of the OpenDaylight code base, like any sane open source project, sir.
All these are syntax related.
They're all syntax related, yeah. That's right, that's right. This one is, it's not really a syntax error, but it's sort of a convention. Yeah. So in my opinion, these are all code review comments that are a complete waste of time. The problem with this sort of code review is that this doesn't review code for functional correctness or for algorithmic smartness. This is all code review that's a complete waste of time of at least 2 people. These are all things that tools can discover instead of humans. So if somebody has to go in there, look at code that somebody write and say, you should have done this like this, and his comment is something that a tool could have detected, and it's a sign that the tooling is not strong enough to cover this, catch this earlier. The best way to go about this is to make developers discover these sort of violations of conventions, best practices, even potential security vulnerabilities, misuses of APIs. A developer should do this in the IDE while he works, while he types, before he sends a code review pull request, or sorry, a change request into Gerrit. And the best way to do this is to show it to a developer right there in the IDE while he types his code, not when you run a build or something. So what I'm telling you here is not non-existent in OpenDaylight. OpenDaylight has this. If you today write code and then you run this thing called a Maven build, you get this report at the build. So CheckStyle prints a number of things and says this is wrong and I don't like how you did this. The problem is people don't look at this. It's normal, right? We're all busy. We're all coding away and fixing our bugs and creating our features. So where you really want these things to show is right there in the IDE, which this automated Eclipse setup does. So this is an example of a networked provider interface. And open up in the Eclipse setup created through this Eclipse tool, you actually get the warnings right there as you type. So this is saying, well, we don't think this is great. You should put a new line here. This is a simple example. There should be a new line here. So this makes, these sort of conventions makes code easier to share between different people. If everybody uses the same conventions on a large code base, we heard the number of, was it, how many developers this morning Nida said? 680 developers? So hundreds of developers on a code base, even if they're not all at the same time, is very important that code is consistent. And in my opinion, the way to achieve this is to put these sort of code review comments before a second person sees it, right there while the developer works. And this is now happening with this tool. Some people in the research community that look at these kind of things call, there's some theory behind this. They call this making sure that developers stay in the flow. So it's very important that you give developers an experience to be productive where they can, while they're in the flow of coding, get feedback on quality metrics, tests, and things like this. Anything that you do that breaks the flow of developing, where you have to change tools, where you have to wait for results from build systems, that's all hindering productivity. So this is an example of how a coder can, while he's in the flow of coding, get immediate feedback through this tooling that's being automatically set up by the Eclipse provisioning tool. Another example of this is this business that the import statements in Java should have a agreed upon order because it makes code reviews easier. So in Java, you have this scoping, you import different symbols into code, and you want to make sure that everybody sorts their import statements in the same way, because then if developer B comes along on code written by developer A, he doesn't keep changing them. So this is something that this tool can check as well. So it's red now if you have the wrong order. And because the IDE is configured in line with the checks, if you say sort import statements, Control-Shift-O, it's a keyboard shortcut for this, it'll automatically sort them directly the right way and make sure that it's consistent with the checks. I'm mentioning this particularly for any developers in the room because we changed this recently. There was a discrepancy between what the check style rules said and what the developer documentation said that didn't match. So last week we aligned this. So if any of you here have code in OpenDaylight, what you should do is use this Eclipse setup tool and do a Control-Shift-O on your modules to align this. And this will save you a ton of check style errors with one click. About 10 minutes left. So about 2/3 through the presentation. There's a number of other plugins in there that are more auxiliary that I want to just brush over real quickly. So these are similar to the Yang IDE. They're just other Eclipse plugins that are handy to have for OpenDaylight developers. One certainly noteworthy is the entire Git integration. So eGit and eGarret are Eclipse plugins that help you to raise changes straight from the IDE. So you don't need to open your command line. You can click a button and pull the change from another developer into your workspace to review it right there in there. This is all pre-configured to already point to the OpenDaylight infrastructure. So if you press that button that I showed you in the first step, and you go get a coffee, and then you have a developer workspace that's ready, where there is no red, it's actually already set up to connect to OpenDaylight. So there's a bunch of configuration steps you'd have to manually do otherwise, which this tooling does for you to be able to be productive. There is some Docker and Vagrant tooling. So a lot of the integration tests that we heard about in the previous presentation can't run without prerequisite other tools available. So a lot of the OVSDB tests need an open vSwitch. And we have Docker images that you can spin up to run this. And you can do this on the command line, or you can use this Eclipse integrated tooling to look at this. I think I have a screenshot of this over here. Oh, this is an example of another plugin that's in there that allows you to have Carafe started up right there in Eclipse. It's just handy. It doesn't really do anything different than when you open a terminal and run it there. But you can get OpenDaylight and Carafe running right there in your IDE. Similarly for the Docker tooling, so this is just a way to see all of your Docker images and the running containers up there right next to where your code is. So again, it reduces the friction from having to switch to different tools, open a command line, cd in somewhere. You can do it all from here. This is a plugin that Red Hat makes as part of the container development environment that I was able to pull into the OpenDaylight Eclipse SDK. All right, two more things to cover. I want to show you real brief what's behind this, because like any healthy open source community, this is not some secret thing I came up with in my basement the last couple of weeks. This is something that's open that all of you can use. You can use it for your own projects. If you find any preferences that are missing that are required for your code bases, you can easily contribute to this. I want to show you how. This is based on a technology called OOMPH that is available at the Eclipse Foundation that is a workspace provisioning tool. So this is a way to describe what source code repositories, preferences, additional plugins are needed to create a convenient development environment for a given project or community. So one of the, right, it's not nearly as complicated as a Starship. Sorry, Star Trek fan here. It's actually quite easy to look at this. In the list of projects that are available here, which you recognize the OpenDaylight projects here. There's one new one which is called Eclipse Setup, and that's simply the source code behind this tool. So if you click this Eclipse Setup in addition to OVSDB or AAA or any of the other OpenDaylight modules, then you get a bunch of files. It's not very much, actually. It's a bunch of files. It's a little Java tool that helps to generate these files. This is all documented in a README file. And if you open it up, you get these setup files here. So this setup file here describes that when you press that button in the tool, it will set up these 20 or so, 25 preferences. So this, for example, is the one that makes sure that the famous Nexus repository that you need to develop on OpenDaylight, the nexus.opendaylight.org, where all the jars get downloaded from, is automatically set up. That's what this particular line here will do. Or in here is the list of all the plugins that are getting installed. And this makes sure that your Eclipse has enough memory, so you don't have to go in there and afterwards start changing your ini file. And it's basically scripted in this description of workspace models. Have a look at it, send changes for this. Like anything else in OpenDaylight, this is open source. If you think this could be done any better, just look at it and change something. In particular, also if you want to add projects. So if you have a project that you're working on that's not part of this workspace setup, you can just add it to the list here. Or ask if you don't know how. Last point. We've spoken about development environment. We've spoken about provisioning of workspaces. We've spoken about code quality metrics. What you really want to do when you write this code is run it. So you're coding something, and you want to ultimately try it out. Even though you will have already written your integration tests, you already have written your unit tests, at some point, you want to throw this into a runtime environment and have it connect to your switches, and routers, or toasters, or whatever you're working on, and try it out. And the way that this is currently done in OpenDaylight had some room for improvement, I felt. So I went there and did two things. First is the build speed. So for those of you in the room, who of you in the room is actually coding on OpenDaylight? Or it's sort of seen some of this before? 1, 2, 3, 4, okay. So one thing that we hear on the mailing list often is that the build process of OpenDaylight is, it does a number of things. So it runs these quality checks, it produces Java doc, and all standard procedures that you do to, whoa, what's this? Hang on, I'm not sure what's happening here with this. Right. It runs a number of build steps, which are all fine. These steps need to run. If you put in a change to propose a code being adjusted or new code that you contribute, all of these things have to run. But there is another use case. If you're locally wanting to build a jar file to deploy in the Karaf environment, then what you really want is to get the jar file built as fast as you can, and you don't need a lot of the extra steps to run. Because of this, there's a new option that's been introduced 2 or 3 weeks ago. Is if you write minus uppercase p, lowercase q, then the build of something like OVSDB, one of the OpenDaylight projects, goes down from 7 minutes, 40 seconds to 1 minute, 16 seconds. That's a considerable reduction in local build time. If you do this 20 times a day, this makes a difference to the time you wait for things to get built. And of course, I couldn't just magically make Maven run faster. What this PQ profile does, it's a quick profile that suppresses quite a number of things which you typically do not want to do, do not need to do for local development. So again, this is developer productivity. It's sort of the continuation of the earlier work on IDE things. When you locally want to try out a change you've made to fix a bug, you do not want to rerun all the integration tests at that time. You do want to rerun the integration tests to make sure you don't break anything and you have non-regression. But Gerrit can do that for you. The machine that runs your change for somebody to code review can run all the tests. And you certainly don't need the Java doc to be rebuilt 20 times a day, nor do you need the Maven site and whatever. So minus PQ skips all of this. All right, so that's good. So build is faster, so 6 times or 5 times faster or something like this. But can we do more? Can we be even hotter? Can we do something more incremental for the turnaround time while you develop? And there is sort of a next step after the build. So far we've optimized the build. We can get the jar file, but you still have to do the manual deployment. So you're working on code, you're fixing a bug, and you now still have to take that jar file and put that jar file somehow into Karaf. So people, traditionally, they would go ahead and take something from what's called a target directory and start to copy it in somewhere, and then you would restart your Karaf environment, and everything would take a few minutes. It's not hours, but if you do this 20 times a day, this is a drag on your productivity. This interrupts your flow as a developer. And I've started looking at something, this is work in progress. Given that OpenDaylight is based on OSGI, OSGI is the industry standard in Java for 2 things, for modularity and for dynamic modularity. These are actually 2 separate things. People sometimes confuse them. Modularity is having clearly defined interfaces between modules, bundles. So Java 9 might get modularity through a project called Jigsaw. That is one thing. And the other one is dynamicity. So dynamicity means that you have modules, and these modules have independent life cycles. One of the key features of OSGI is that you should be able, in theory, to bring bundles up, try something out, then tear them down, stop them, and install updates of the bundles at runtime to get, and I'm out of time. Give me 2 minutes to finish this, a quick demo, and we'll wrap it up. This is the last slide, and then a quick demo. And this is something that Carafe supports through a command called bundle watch. So if you do bundle watch star, you tell your runtime environment, please watch out for any changes. And I've added this new option here to the build environment, add install repository path. I want to show you this real quick live. So suppose that I have some code here, which in this case really just prints hello world when it starts and says goodbye when it stops. Okay? So what I should be able to do is, let me go in here. So this is my Carafe. So I can do a log.tail. And if my screen here works, okay. We see that the last thing happened here was that the hello activator said hello world. So this is a running environment. It's simplified for the sake of a 1-minute demo, but this could be running OVSDB, have configured your OVS switches and all. And I'm making a change to the code now. For the moment, I'm just changing hello world demo. And I have a keyboard shortcut. I press Alt-Shift-XM. Alt-Shift-XM says hello activator has been modified. Save change. Save change, yes. And it asks me to input the value of my Carafe system folder. So in the Carafe runtime environment, there's a place where all these jar files go. It's a directory structured in the format of a Maven repository. I've already configured it here. It's in my case in hello world, target assembly system. These folders here are where actually the jar files are all saved. I say OK. And what happens here is that we run a build in Eclipse here. I don't have to open a command line, which actually runs this PQ profile that we saw before from Q, from Star Trek, which makes it run fast. And it has installed this new jar file here in 9 seconds into the directory we've given before. And what this will have done is over here in our running Carafe, where there's 100 or so bundles running, there's a number of things that are happening in there, it has hot replaced that code by tearing down the previous version of the bundle here and saying goodbye, and then reloading this bundle and giving us our new hello world demo message. This could have been a bug fix you made in a networking module. This could have been YANG files you changed. This could have been code you refactored. This could be a change you pulled down from the Git Gerrit code repository to test it. So you could say, pull me that change. The IDE would have recompiled it. You would have hit Shift-Alt-XM, and you would have hot reloaded this bundle. This is a fairly significant productivity increase compared to having to manually copy things and restart things and wait for everything to come back up. And this is pretty cool, I think. This is, at this stage, a work in progress. It works. As you saw, the demo was live. There is still work to be done in OpenDaylight specific code. So there is some work that needs to be done inside the bundles for this to work on all of the features. With this, I'm done. 30 seconds on some ideas for next, really fast, the hot reloading, finishing that, some work to be done there. On the code quality, now that we have it in the IDE, there's some adoption that needs to be driven. So I'm hoping that at least the OVSDB project can actually be made to adopt these code quality metrics and stick to them through enforcing them. On the completely separate topic is that now having this cool standard IDE that's pre-configured for everybody, there's a tooling called BND Tools. BND Tools is a OSGI development environment that would fit very, very nicely for OpenDaylight. And perhaps in the coming month, that can be integrated. It'll have a number of advantages. It would aid with semantic versioning, which is something that OpenDaylight could benefit from, that would get IDE integration for that. I'm out of time. Thank you for your interest. Thank you for your time attending this. Fun. And that's not a drinking club, I think Neela said this morning, but we produce code. We produce a running platform. So where's the code? Let me try it out. Now, I found this page. So this page is fairly long, like I'm showing here on the right. has like a copy. You scroll down here, and this is all the things you have to do to actually get the code visible. And then sort of 3/4 down the page, there's this section on the wiki. And it says, well, congratulations to you that you've followed 100 things to do. Not quite 100. But actually, it's not going to work because Eclipse is no longer able to compile OpenDaylight because yada, 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 a bunch of excuses. And it's like, well, that's interesting. So I took up this new job, and I'm not even going to be able to use an IDE. I've got to do something about this. So I looked a little bit closer at this. I'm not actually getting paid to say this, but I did read this book, and I think it's really good. So you might find it interesting as well. What questions should we be asking ourselves today? We should ask the same questions that we ask ourselves every day: the purpose of life, the meaning of life, and whoa, what, why, what, and how. So I want to talk to you about why has there been some work done on developer experience for OpenDaylight. So I introduce the topic, show you what we've actually done. Very short demo. I won't be able to run through the entire demo of the setup, but sort of kick it off and show you guys how you can try this out at home. A word about how it's done, so what's actually underneath this principle. And then the second part is sort of two parts. The second part's something about hot wheels and hot deployment and hot code. We'll see that. There will be a short demo that's part of that, and an idea about what's coming next on this front, and some Q&A at the end. Why? Why this topic? Why developer experience? It's easy, right? There's some source code you heard in the presentation from my colleague before, some Git repository. So you clone the Git repository, and you use a Vim and VI and a hex editor and see lots of zeros and ones and start coding, right? It turns out that in practice, if you have a code base that has a large code base, it has dependencies, that has some tooling that goes with it, some code generation in the case of OpenDaylight. Hey, everyone. Thanks for attending this session here. I want to talk to you about the title of the presentation, OpenDaylight Has Oomph. What the presentation really is about this developer experience for OpenDaylight. Actually, I was going to do one thing here, put on a little timer, because that's always a challenge. All right. My name's Michael. I work for Red Hat since not very long. I actually started this job 2 months ago. So brand new to the community, meeting a lot of people here. It's very exciting to be here and be able to meet face-to-face people that I've seen on the mailing list and interacted with on video conferences. I tweet on Vorburger about many things not related to networking. And I wanted to shout out a book that the Red Hat CEO wrote that's called The Open Organization. So you're doing some modeling, and this modeling generates some code, and you want some tooling for that. And for that tooling, in the industry, what we use is we use an IDE, an integrated development environment for when we write code. There's a bunch of them out there. There's one in particular that's, I guess it's fair to say, the de facto industry standard integrated development environment. It's a thing called Eclipse, which a large majority of people who code in Java nowadays use. So the OpenDaylight wiki has a page that says Eclipse setup. So about 2 months ago, when I started joining this project, I was like, OK, let me find the code, and let me look at the code to see what people in this community do, how they code. Because we are a community that doesn't produce paper only, like a standards body.